What is up, Maryland basketball fans? Welcome into another Fear the Podcast. I'm Matt Monero. I'm really pleased to be joined here today by Taylor Lyons of the Baltimore Sun. He's also a Maryland alum. Shout out to the Maryland College of Journalism here. Taylor, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What's going on, Matt?
I'm excited to do this. For anybody that does not have a Baltimore Sun subscription right now, Taylor is your main reason why you should go get it, because he has been killing it this week on the Terps beat. 3 really good stories here in a row, and we're going to talk through all angles of each of them, I think, in some way, shape, or form here. But let's start with the one that sort of, I think, maybe jumped off the page here the most, or at least first. And that's just the Ja'Kobi Gillespie situation. So per your reporting, Ja'Kobi Gillespie, obviously a star of last year's Maryland Sweet 16 team, is taking Blueprint Sports to mediation, essentially. It's not quite the same as suing them, but this is basically arguing over some missed payments here from an NIL perspective. Blueprint is sort of picking up the reins with the from the NIL front for Maryland. And according to the Gillespie's family lawyer, Isaac Connor, and his father, Byron Gillespie here, the NIL payments are not coming as they intended or they expected them to come. So Taylor, just give us the bare bones of this one real quick. Like, what does this come down to? And then we'll get a little more into the nitty gritty as we go.
Yeah, so essentially what's going on is the Gillespie camp is saying that Blueprint is not honoring their NIL contract that Ja'Kobi signed with them prior to last season. What they're saying is that once Gillespie entered the transfer portal, Blueprint stopped paying Gillespie, said that was a breach of contract that you transferred. What Gillespie's camp is arguing is that there was no clause in his contract that said if you enter the transfer portal, the contract is terminated. Obviously, Blueprint is saying there was such a clause in the contract, and that's why we're not paying you. So Gillespie entered the portal late March, early April, around that time, announced his commitment to Tennessee. A few days later, he was scheduled to get his last 2 monthly payments, April 15th, May 15th, and those never came. And I think what Jeff Ehrman actually reported was that he's owed about $100,000 more. The total contract was $600,000 broken up over 12 monthly payments. That's $100,000. What Gillespie's camp told me is that Blueprint offered about a quarter of that to settle the dispute, which according to that math would be about $25,000. So essentially what they're arguing for is $75,000 more. They're going to go to mediation. Gillespie's father, Byron, told me hopefully this month to get this settled, and we'll see where it goes from there. I'm definitely going to continue to follow that. Right now, as far as we know, it's just a he said, she said. I mean, no one's seen the contract. We've asked for the contract from both sides. We haven't seen it. But it is a very black and white thing. Like, it's either in the contract or it's not.
It should be, right? It sounds like an easy thing to
or it's not. Yeah. And I think what Harry Geller actually told you guys, he talked with me too in our story, he's quoted, but he told Jeff Ehrman that when Blueprint took over the contracts, they were all rewritten. And for whatever reason, Geller told Ehrman is that transfer clause was in 12 of the 13 contracts. And for whatever reason, it was not in Gillespie's, is what Geller said. Yeah. So I think there's kind of two ways to approach this. I mean, one, if this turns out how Gillespie's camp thinks it will, Maryland's going to have to answer questions about why they partner with a collective that doesn't honor contracts. Yeah. And not just Maryland. I mean, Blueprint partner, I think on their website, it says
they're huge.
More than 70 athletic departments. So they're going to have to answer why they partner with Blueprint, a collective that doesn't honor contracts, if this turns out how Gillespie's camp thinks it will. And
just on that one real quick, Taylor, I'm pretty sure that Blueprint worked with Buzz Williams at Texas A&M as well before coming over. I'd have to double check that, but I do think there was a pre-existing relationship there.
Yeah, and Maryland actually announced they signed I think the language is a multi-year agreement or a multi-year extension with Blueprint. They announced that a couple months ago, and they had been partnered with Maryland since 2023. Gotcha. So I guess the natural next questions are to Blueprint. One, did you intentionally not include that clause, which raises more questions? Or two, did you just straight up forget, which I think raises even more questions?
It's bad either way if you've missed it.
I think Gillespie, whether Willard stayed or not, I think Gillespie was probably one of the more likely players to transfer if Willard stayed. I mean, he had been linked to Tennessee for a while now, which I think that just raises questions about why are you not taking those actions to try to keep your players here.
Yeah, that's not good business long term to default on some of these payments. And in the grand scheme of things, the type of money we're talking about here is, squabbling over 75K or whatever the case may be, really worth it for you from a public perception perspective or a recruiting perception perspective. So to me, I've seen some different things, and I think you guys had this too, that Maryland is hoping all of this gets settled amicably, and so does Blueprint, and they're saying the right things, but I would almost pay that much money up front just to have it go away and just say, hey, there was some disagreement here. We'll honor the spirit of the agreement. But
it makes you wonder. I mean, $75,000 is not chump change, but to a large NIL collective like Blueprint, you would assume that they would be willing to pay that just to avoid all this negative PR. That hoping to resolve this amicably. That was from the statement Blueprint gave the Sun. The Maryland did not make Jeroy Simon available to us.
Okay.
He's kind of the director of revenue sharing, kind of all sports general manager role for Maryland right now, including men's basketball. So we were not able to talk with him. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the language coming from both sides. So we'll see. I mean, we're going to continue to follow that over the next few weeks or so. But if everything Gillespie's camp is saying, it sounds like it sounds like that clause wasn't there. So
even if that is a simple transcription error on their part, it was supposed to just 1-for-1 in the new contract and everybody signed it. It's not on Gillespie to point that out to them, right? Like, it's the contract they gave him and he signed it. And I would imagine that if it's not there, it probably works out largely in the Gillespie camp's favor here at this point. I did think
his lawyer kind of told me that. Isaac Connor, you mentioned, he said, like, when we originally signed the contract and when we read it, it wasn't in there.
Right.
And of course, he's not going to say anything.
Oh, yeah.
He's not going to say, hey, teacher, you forgot to give us homework.
Yeah, exactly. I do think some of the commentary from Byron Gillespie is a little bit interesting, just given some of the other context here. He also said when Willard left, they pretty much quit playing all the players. We're fighting that right now. There were players that did get their money and players that didn't, and we are still fighting for it. It kind of makes it look like Willard was right. Maybe they don't have the money. From all the other details of the story and from your reporting and from what Jeff said, it doesn't seem to me like that's the case. We're not hearing this about other guys not receiving what they think they're owed. They all had that contract clause per Harry Geller. So seems like there's a little bit of hyperbole going on here, maybe to make the point here and dig the knife in a little bit there. But have you heard anything from any of these other guys that feel like maybe they didn't get what they were owed as well?
Yeah. So as far as we know, Gillespie's the only one who's dealing with this. We talked to Rodney Rice's father and we obtained Rodney Rice's NIL contract with Blueprint. And his did have that transfer clause. It said, if you enter the transfer portal, you're not getting paid anymore. The contract becomes terminated. He's now at USC. He, like Gillespie, did not get his last couple monthly payments. But that was directly in Rice's contract. Yeah. We also reached out to a few other former players, either them or their families or agents, didn't hear back. So as of now, Gillespie and Rice are the only ones we know of. Rice didn't get paid, rightfully so. Gillespie, we'll see.
Yeah, you would think that these guys are all pretty tight. And if I've talked, so if there were other guys, they'd either be getting in on this sort of same action or, making it a bigger deal here. But either way, whether it's Blueprint or not, that's still the agency or the association representing Maryland here in this situation. It's not an overly good look for Maryland as a program, just given all the light that Kevin Willard did shine on this sort of general situation. And, there's a whole lot of other stuff that comes up here. Maybe let's sort of segue here into a little bit of a Willard leaving and some of his commentary. He's also just been doing other interviews this week, did one with Seth Davis that said, I know it turned out ugly, but I love the place. It's a great place. I like the fan base. I know they hate me, but I loved living there. I loved everything about it. Thought that was kind of interesting because when you compare that with some of the quotes from Harry Geller in your reporting here, it doesn't quite paint the same picture. For folks not familiar with Geller, he was the volunteer running the Maryland Collective prior to Blueprint taking over here. So a man of the people here, Harry Geller, friend of the program here. I like what Harry is about. So I appreciate him giving sort of his candid take on this, but he said, "You can quote me directly on this. This is always what he said to me," referring to Kevin Willard. "I've never seen a place that cares less about winning in basketball than this." And also said, "From the first week I met him, he was unhappy." So, somebody's not telling the truth here, whether it's Willard, "Oh, I love the place and I'll miss it so much there," or it's Geller that, maybe the clock was ticking from the minute Kevin Willard took the job here.
Yeah, I think this is a nice kind of transition from the Gillespie piece, because I think this Gillespie part, maybe, it's kind of representative of just the abrupt nature of Willard and Evans's exits, because, maybe if Willard stays, Gillespie doesn't transfer. Maybe if Evans doesn't leave, he's able to kind of smooth over the relationship between the player and the collectives a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, going back to Willard, I mean, you mentioned the couple stories he's done this week. I think it's important to note, the Sun reached out to him for, request to interview for our story. He could have responded to what we published then. He declined. Now he's on kind of a media tour this week, trying to, backtrack, salvage that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, by all accounts, Willard was never happy at Maryland in College Park. Yeah, so I think, Kevin Willard, I think, maybe part of him always kind of wanted to get back to the Northeast, Villanova. I mean, he's, from New York, coached at Iona, Seton Hall, now obviously Villanova. So I think maybe part of him always wanted to get back up there, get in that sphere. He's very close with Rick Pitino, another character mentioned in the story as someone Willard would call a lot of times throughout his 3 years at Maryland. According to Harry Geller, he told us that. And, oftentimes their conversations would kind of devolve into Willard being frustrated at what he said Maryland wasn't giving him, compared to what St. John's was giving Pitino. So I think part of that maybe made leaving the Big Ten, where football is a priority, go back to the Big East, where basketball is a priority. That made that attractive to him. That's not to say, I don't think Kevin Willard always saw Maryland as a stepping stone.
Sure.
There's probably part of him that really did believe he could win. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't have taken the job. There was probably part of him that thought he could win at Maryland. I think it maybe was just a situation where he needed to get in the building. He really needed to get behind the scenes, get behind those closed doors, talk with the boosters and everyone, and really see, if he felt he could win or not. And obviously he didn't feel that way.
One of the things I think is sort of most interesting here, and this is from the article, which I thought was just the thing that maybe popped out the most to me. Willard always asking for more, loathed Evans over a belief that he could have done more to make his program competitive, despite being given almost everything he requested. Evans, who rarely said no, thought Willard's complaints were unfair. Geller and Rick Ja'Kobi, maybe, another prominent Maryland booster, told the Sun. So we keep hearing that, like, Kevin Willard didn't feel like he had everything he needed, and maybe some of that's true, and they did beef up some of these things they offered him, toward the end here. But the only really example that anyone ever keeps giving, and Willard himself keeps giving, is the one night stay in New York. Everything else, it seems like they realistically kind of acquiesce to. You got the private donor lounge, which I want to circle back around to here at some point. But I don't know, any other instances that you heard about that were obvious, like Kevin Willard did not have X thing that he needed?
No. And I think that's kind of the story, is Willard is just a guy who is always wants more. He's always asking for more. He's saying, hey, can I get this lounge? Can I get that? Can I get more money? Can I get in the contract? He just wants more and more and more. And like I said in the piece, Damon Evans, pretty much every answer was yes. I mean, they offered him a raise. They offered him more, revenue sharing money. They're building the new practice facility that's going to be open before next season. So pretty much every answer Willard got was yes, and it still wasn't enough. And I think that's kind of the story here, is that, right or wrong, whether Willard felt he was getting what he wanted or not, the only example anyone's really seeing, like you said, is that night in New York. And you can question, I think Willard's quote was, we can't be a serious program if I can't do things like this. Sure, maybe, I don't know. But I mean, if every answer he was getting pretty much was yes, I think that just kind of speaks to Willard's personality, of someone who's always chasing more, always chasing the next thing, to a point where, it ultimately one pushed him to leave, but also pushed Damon Evans to just honestly just grow tired of Willard and continuing to meet these demands only for more to come later, to a point where it also pushed Evans out and pushed him to want to leave.
Not to play armchair psychologist a little bit, but if you're Damon Evans, you probably have to keep saying yes to those things while your basketball coach is winning, or it makes you pretty much the face of Maryland not being competitive enough here, which ultimately happened anyway. But I almost wondered if the New York thing wasn't here's a chance for us to tell him no about something that's ultimately kind of trivial because we're just sick of acquiescing to everything else he asks for. I mean, it sounds a little like Bush League to just be like, no, you can't have one more night in a vacuum. But it's also a little weird that you'd give him everything else he'd want, including a giant renovation at Xfinity Center, but not one night extra lodging and travel and things like that. So I almost wonder if this is Damon Evans just being like, dude, I got to push back on something here at some point. And also from the article, a quote from Harry Geller, there was always a rift. Willard had an attitude about it the whole time, and Damon didn't do much to help it. The two of them went at it. They butted heads from the beginning. And in the end, they both had exit strategies, and Maryland got screwed. Willard has said sort of contrary things that, if Damon never left, I probably never leave, and things of that nature. Those two things don't match to me. So I guess what's your sense, Taylor, of what the real truth is there of the relationship between these two guys?
Yeah, it seems like there was always just kind of a personality clash between the two. And I don't think, I don't think I was breaking any news by saying these two didn't like each other. I mean,
Sure.
there were times where it kind of bubbled up and became public.
Mm-hmm.
There was the one, Evans went on 105.7, I think, in January. And he's like, hey, Kevin, you got to start winning some more road games.
Right.
And that couldn't have made Willard happy.
Sure.
But it was true. I mean, they weren't good on the road.
No.
So I think it was just a personality clash from the beginning that over 3 years just kind of grew tiresome, more or less.
And that to me means the only thing you can take from some of Willard's comments are revisionist history or trying to save face here after the fact. The timeline is still a little weird. Some of the reporting here is that Willard told players he planned to stay at Maryland throughout the whole tournament and was only using it as leverage for his own negotiations and things like that. But then you've got Rodney Rice saying that, hey, up until the last minute, he was telling us he was leaving. And then there's some contrary reporting that, basically Willard, the writing was on the wall for people. He eventually told them over a Zoom call, but players started hearing from their agents and other coaches and stuff like that with the expectation that, hey, they might want a new home if Willard moves on. So it seemed like the worst kept secret in the coaching industry from all accounts. But now Willard is saying if Damon didn't jump ship, I probably would have stayed. So I don't know. I have a hard time with reconciling what really is true from a timeline perspective.
Yeah, I think, I like you said, kind of worst kept secret. I think just to kind of establish the timeline, Villanova fired Kyle Neptune in February, I believe. And we have a quote from Rick Ja'Kobi, who we mentioned earlier, former president of the Terrapin Club, who said, I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin Willard had a handshake deal with Villanova in February. I don't think he was saying that, matter of fact.
Sure, but there's some talk at least, yeah.
Yeah, but it certainly, you start to hear the rumors come up. And then Willard, in the article that came out yesterday or the day before, whatever, he said that I was honest with players the whole time. Now, what does honest mean? Who knows? What we do know is Willard was telling players throughout the tournament that he was going to stay at Maryland. Players were telling the media that. Players were telling their parents that. Sure. Rodney, after the Sweet 16 game, he told the media in San Francisco, Willard, he told us he's staying the whole time. And kind of the word in the locker room was he's going to stay. He's only using this opening as leverage to negotiate for more that will help us. Obviously, that did not end up being the case. And then, like you said, the agents, they start calling. I think players kind of started to realize as they got closer that he was going to leave and he was lying to them. Agents, what we heard from Geller and from some of the parents is that agents started kind of shopping their players in the portals. What was available. Byron Gillespie told us he started getting some calls around then. So I think that, like you said, the timeline is kind of messy. who really, only Willard and the players really know.
Sure.
But from everything we know, everything we've heard is that Willard was telling players the whole time, I'm going to stay, just using this as a negotiation tool. And that obviously did not end up happening. But players believed him the whole time. There's the quote from Byron in the story, I think, where Ja'Kobi tells them, like, we were bought in on him being here the whole time. And obviously that wasn't the case. And I think there is something to be said about why those players didn't go to Villanova with him. I mean, Villanova pursued Gillespie and Rice and other guys. They ended up with Tafari Gapari, Braden Pierce, and Malachi Palmer. So.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know, as the kids said at some point, I don't know if they still say, but the math ain't math in here, essentially, right? Like, it's just, it's one of those things where you're pinning the whole thing on, well, Damon left, so that's what really changed things for me. But by all accounts, you guys did not like each other. So I really don't think that was the factor that changed from what Willard said to the players and staff. Suddenly made his comments.
I think that was kind of the scapegoat plan for Willard. Was
exactly.
I didn't have a boss. I didn't have anyone to negotiate with. What do you want me to do?
That forced my hand, and it made what I was saying untrue all of a sudden.
I don't have a boss. Yeah, right. But by all accounts, he was looking elsewhere before, because he just found out he didn't know. A lot of people in the athletic department didn't know Damon Evans was looking at SMU, and they were told. That was a surprise to a lot of people in the athletic department when that came up. I think most, even Evans' closest allies, I think, didn't learn that until a couple days before it was announced. And what Geller told me was that Willard found that out the day of his press conference in Seattle, where he says Damon's probably, we all know what Damon's doing. He's probably going to SMU. As far as I know, that was when Willard found out that Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever that was. So, to say that you were going to stay all the way up until then, and then that drastically changes everything, who knows?
Yeah, and then Willard has since said, my only real crime here, I guess, is that I got up there and I was too honest or something to that effect, or I told the truth. And it's just like, no, I mean, maybe just misdirecting a bunch of people is the only crime here. But either way, you mentioned some of those players are going with Kevin Willard, and they were not the impact players on the team, which made another wrinkle of this story a little interesting. Harry Geller told you guys that Willard, Geller's plan was to pay all the players on the roster, and Willard pushed back on that and said that he only wanted to pay the top 8 guys. Geller thought that was bad for team chemistry, and ultimately made sure that everybody got something. So said when Braden Pierce, who played in all of 6 minutes his whole career here, was still getting $2,000 a month, that meant something to him. Geller said there were plenty of things the athletic department could have done off the books to help, but they just kind of let the volunteers run it. You're never really going to build a successful program on the backs of volunteers. So he parlayed that a little bit into like what was wrong with the program, and some of the true stuff I think Willard highlighted. But I don't know, if I'm Braden Pierce and I'm reading this after the fact that Kevin Willard did think I deserve to get paid, and I'm one of the few people that followed him to Villanova, I'd be a little salty today if it were me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Braden Pierce was probably in that top 8 that Willard wanted to pay. But I think kind of going off that, I mean, that speaks to more of the structural issues behind the scenes at Maryland that Willard probably did have valid points about. A lot of Willard and Maryland's competition these last couple of years have full-time general managers to run and run the finances. And Maryland was relying on volunteers: Harry Geller, Harvey Sanders, Stan Goldstein. These guys weren't employees of Maryland. They weren't getting paid from the collectives. Totally volunteers. Meanwhile, a couple teams at the Big Ten, Duke, I think North Carolina. I mean, there's several teams that it's 4 more every year that have full-time general managers to run.
And whole staffs with them, scouting departments, everything, like big time.
And meanwhile, Willard's relying on volunteers. So I think that's what Geller is speaking to, is that, like Geller said, I think I did a good job, but at the end of the day, I'm a volunteer. So there's really only so much I can do.
To me, that whole thing points to a lack of like overall leadership within the program, the athletic department as a whole, and just really sort of like a mom and pop approach to running a major, I don't know, multi-billion-dollar potentially business. Like when you factor in, the length of contracts and business deals all these guys are dealing with, and all the other factors in play beyond just NIL and all this other stuff, but the advertising, the facilities they're building, it's just it's not giving me a lot of comfort in the man at the top of the ship here. And ultimately that all kind of funnels up in a business to the guy at the top. And that's Daryl Pines. And another piece of the story I thought was interesting. Geller basically said that Pines voiced frustration about Willard leaving after they met all of his demands, but ultimately his frustration sort of turned to Evans, who he felt like that they gave a real lifeline to, and he was, quote, a dead man walking before Maryland essentially gave him a job and then promoted him into an even bigger job. To me, though, that's a bad look on Pines, right? Like ultimately these guys work for you and all these things at the end of the day. It was sort of the inmates running the asylum here. So I don't know, any sense from boosters or anything like this about just how they're feeling about the job that Pines has done overall? And should we have any more confidence in, him appointing these new guys to replace these people?
Yeah, I will say I think every booster I've talked to really likes how Maryland kind of landed the plane here.
Okay.
This was a incredibly unique situation where both your AD and your basketball coach leave within 2 weeks of each other in the middle of the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
It's far less than ideal. It was very unique in that you have a university president leading the search for a men's basketball coach. That's not typical at all, not ideal at all. Obviously, Pines is not a sports person.
Yeah.
Not a sports guy. Yeah. But I, kind of going back to that, I think a lot of people I've talked to really admire how they landed the plane here, considering everything that they, the cards they were dealt. I mean, Jim
Mm-hmm.
Smith, by all accounts, is just the kind of guy they were looking for.
Yeah.
Someone not necessarily with a college sports background, but with a revenue generating business background, which he has. And he has worked. I mean, he worked with Ohio State for a little bit. He's an alum there. And Buzz Williams, I mean, you talk to a lot of boosters, fans, a lot of people would say Buzz is an upgrade over. So
I'm happy with where they are from what I know about these guys so far. Obviously, it's early days, but this does feel a little bit like the whole arsonist fireman thing, where like if you're Pines, you let this thing clearly spiral out of control. And whether you're ultimately that directly aware of the sports landscape, you have to know your AD and your coach sort of publicly sniping at each other, fighting behind the scenes isn't a great situation overall. It didn't seem like Willard and Loxley were particularly close either. There just seemed to be some amount of turmoil here. And yet, they've, like you said, even landed the plane pretty well, but it's basically they kind of cleaned up a mess they allowed to fester to a point where it became a mess. So doesn't inspire like a great deal of confidence, but I do feel okay about like, hey, this could have been a whole lot worse. And maybe we actually are better for it because of this.
That is the sense people I talk to have, is that this could have been a lot worse. I think ultimately, that responsibility does fall on Pines for allowing this to happen. And like you said, I mean, Willard, I think, kind of the trio of Willard, Loxley, and Evans was a lot more chaotic than what they hope Smith, Buzz, Loxley is. I think Willard and Loxley were kind of always jockeying for Evans' attention, and Loxley and Evans were much closer. I mean, both of them would tell you
football guys, and
that they were much closer. Loxley even said he came out right after Willard, said all that stuff publicly. That Loxley said like, "Hey, I feel good about everything the athletic department's given me." So I think that was kind of a soft dig at Willard, saying like, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm good."
Last one I wanted to just circle back to here was this private donor lounge thing, because as an alum that likes to go to games and shares a season ticket package, but also isn't a big donor, like I was like, really, this is the thing we're most focused on upgrading here. But it sounds like that was something driven by a bigger donor that Willard sort of forced them to try to acquiesce to get to happen. So I don't know, any more insight on this donor lounge situation?
Yeah, I think that's just like a kind of a small example of something that Willard asked for, very inconsequential. Like he just somewhere for donors to kind of hang out during games.
Yeah.
It's an example of Willard asking and Evans saying yes. I think it's called the Champions.
Yeah, I don't even remember.
It's up, like if you're in Xfinity, it's up above where the press seating is behind
opposite the wall, essentially.
Yes, opposite of the wall. I've been up there. It's pretty nice. Cool spot to watch a game from. But yeah, I mean, it kind of is a small example of, and that was back in Willard's first season, 2023. Terps went to Louisville. I think they won that game. I can't remember.
I think no, sadly.
But they didn't win.
It's bad that the first year is kind of a blur to me at this point, just given everything that's happened since then.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I mean, that was a small example of something dating back to Willard's first season that he was not necessarily unhappy. You know, that's not something to get worked up over about, but something that he felt Maryland was behind the competition in. And Evans says yes, and it continues, you know, kind of festers over the years to a point where the demands are just growing so high that they're either impossible to fulfill or Evans just wants to leave. I mean, they offered him, you know, Maryland came out with a, you know, press release after Willard left and said, like, hey, we offered him a contract that would have given him one of the highest revenue sharing budgets in the Big Ten. There was a report, I think, from John Rothstein, who said they offered him a contract that would have made him a top 10 highest paid coach in the country. So by all accounts, they were willing to throw resources behind Willard, and he just didn't give him the chance.
Yeah. Well, good riddance. I know you can't say that as a professional. I can say that on here. I'm very happy with where we ended up, like we talked about. Taylor, any other aspect of this that we haven't touched on that you think is worth pointing out for fans and listeners?
I mean, I think just kind of moving forward, I think some of the biggest issues, or not issues, but some of the things Maryland's going to have to deal with. One in the short term is this Gillespie situation. Yeah. Figuring that out and kind of saving their image, because if this becomes to a point where, say Gillespie wins this mediation, that he gets his $100,000. If I'm a recruit thinking about transferring to Maryland, or a high school kid thinking about committing to Maryland, why am I going to go to a school that does not 100% of the time honor NIL contracts? So that's something that they got to figure out. I think long term, Maryland really needs to figure out if they want to be a football school or a basketball school. And I think that was something that's always kind of talked about amongst fans. But now with the revenue sharing coming in, and you have this, de facto salary cap of the $20.5 million, it's going to be really school's first chance to establish if we are a football school or if we are a basketball school. You're going to see, the Ohio States, the LSUs, the Alabamas of the world commit more to football than they do for basketball. You're going to see, I'm just guessing here, but Duke, North Carolina, whoever else commit more to basketball than you are to football. So where Maryland falls in that, who knows? But with it being sort of a salary cap, if they have one of the highest funded men's basketball rosters in the country, they're going to have one of the worst funded football rosters in the country. So it's really a give and take that they're going to have to decide really just what they want to be.
Yeah, I think regardless of which direction they ultimately sort of steer themselves, they've got to just ramp up the level of how serious it seems like they're taking this compared to the rest of the competition. And, there are just even big time programs that are a little behind the times, and you hear stuff going on in North Carolina and things like that, where they've been kind of slow to adapt to the changing landscape. And those are the universities that are getting kind of left behind. And what you did in the past doesn't really matter to kids the same way now. So that Maryland is a program with a national title in its history in basketball. Most of these kids weren't alive at that point, that they're recruiting. So it only goes so far. It's what can you do for me now? And, not having a scouting department, not kind of beating, the bushes here, not finding guys internationally, like they're going to have to get creative if they're not going to have the same resources. So hopefully at the very least, that's the one fallout from this Willard situation, is that they know they've got to step their games up. I know some people listening to this are like, oh my God, can we just move on from Kevin Willard? Why are we still talking about this? But I do think it plays a pretty big role in the kind of the fork in the road here for Maryland and how they choose to respond to this. And the early indications are positive, but you can't just bring in a creative GM and then sort of cuff his hands, or, an excitable coach, but not really give him enough stuff to keep people, hyped up about. So we'll see how it plays out. Taylor, you've been awesome. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for the reporting. You're doing our university proud here with good investigative sports journalism. So I really appreciate the effort and the time, and you making us with that Merrill degree look good. So great work, man.
There we go. Thank you for having me on, Matt. Pleasure talking Terps with you.
All right. Yeah, everybody go get that Baltimore Sun subscription like we talked about. Check out Taylor's work. Taylor, where can people find you on Twitter and things like that too?
Yeah, Taylor J. Lyons on Twitter. Same on Instagram. And yeah, going to continue following this in the Baltimore Sun, this Gillespie situation. We'll see how that turns out. And I'm really interested to see where Maryland settles in this early stage, looking ahead to next fall when the revenue sharing starts, becoming instituted, where Maryland falls in that. I kind of have some questions with, because the Jeroy Simon, who is mentioned in the story, he, from what it's been explained to me, he's kind of like Maryland's all sports GM. He's kind of running everything. Whereas I know some teams have a football only GM and a basketball only GM. So there are maybe some questions about how invested you can be in either of them if you're running both of them. So we'll see. We'll see how Maryland, kind of handles this new wave of college sports.
Well, keep asking all the right questions that we want to hear about as fans. We're trusting you to keep pushing these guys and holding them accountable for us. So great stuff so far. Look forward to following along the way. Everybody, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that little like button for us, rate, review, subscribe. All those things are really helpful for us. Tell a friend. And like I said, follow Taylor's work and hear the podcast.